forgot, I think he's got all those guys back there. So we're right on time. So we'll go ahead and get started with prayer, if you would bow with me. Our great God and Father, we want to thank you so much, Lord, for this day. We want to thank you for the opportunity to be here with Christians, with people who are striving to please you as each of us are, Lord. And we know we're not perfect. We know that we struggle and are just so inadequate. So we fall so short of your grace, Lord. And yet we're trying. We're here trying. We're not satisfied. We want to provoke one another to love and good works. We want to lift one another up when we're discouraged and challenge one another to do better. And we just pray that you'll help us in this regard, Lord, that we can be the kind of people that can truly push one another along to a closer and deeper relationship with you. And we're thankful for opportunities like this that allow us to open your word together and to think about these eternal truths that you've revealed for us. We are enjoying the study of Moses, and we pray that you'll help us to be able to reflect on all the many lessons that can be gleaned from his life and your interaction with him. We pray, Lord, that you'll help us specifically this morning to all be able to take something from this study that we can use in our lives and try to help others with wherever possible. We do ask, Lord, that your blessing will be with those of our group, our congregation who aren't able to be here this morning. We pray that you'll help us to see to their needs, look in on them as we have the opportunity. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Excuse me. Right. Obviously, going through our character study of Moses, we were getting into the story of Korah's rebellion in Numbers chapter 16. Kind of, I think, where our discussion got to last week. We were talking about as the punishment, and I didn't really put punishment on here, or the actual opening of the earth that we see in verse 30 and following. But we had read that, we were talking about it, so we kind of pick up there and then move in toward this point as well. This is part of it, where we see the glory of the Lord coming. And again, just to kind of frame the scene, you have Korah as well as Dathan and Abiram specifically mentioned as standing up and challenging the authority of Moses, the authority of Aaron. What is interesting, to me, it's an interesting difference from some of the earlier rebellions, is at other times when Moses asked people to stand with him, who's ever on the Lord's side, come to me, specifically at Mount Sinai, it was the Levites. The Levites were there. They had their swords, and they went through the camp killing the people who weren't standing with the Lord. In this story, it's the Levites. It's the Levites who are rebelling. And mentions some others too. Is it Reuben, or the tribe of Reuben as well? But it makes a specific point about Aaron exalting himself. This is in their words, exalting himself over the rest of the congregation, over the rest of the Levites, I think is part of the point that they're making. And so that's part of what's going on here. And you have these instructions to 250 of the men to bring this incense before the Lord. 250 censers that are supposed to burn incense to the Lord. And they end up, at the end of this reading in verse 35, fire comes out from the Lord and consumes these 250 men. So not only do you have the earth opening up and swallowing the main instigators of all this, but you have fire coming out and consuming the other 250 men who were trying to get the same recognition, trying to get the same position as Aaron. And God just absolutely makes it clear, Aaron's my guy. Aaron and his priesthood, his descendants are going to be the men who are allowed to stand before me. That's a big part of the story. So we can kind of pick up in the middle of all that. But I know one of the points I feel like really worth dwelling on is the I guess arrogance is one word that comes to mind, but the fact that these men, having seen all that they had seen and witnessed all they had witnessed, were brave, arrogant enough to come and challenge Moses' authority, Aaron's authority, to put the incense forward, thinking that maybe they had a right to stand with Aaron, not realizing that they would be rejected. And certainly, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram standing up as they did and completely rejecting Moses' authority. Remember in that reading, Moses asked them to come and stand, and give an account basically, and they won't even come out. They won't even come face him. They've got that kind of disdain for his authority at this point, which is unbelievable. But again, as we were finishing off talking last week, you see Moses saying, if these men die, verse 29, as all men die, then the Lord has not sent me. That's still the question on the table, is Moses and by extension Aaron God's representatives, or is it going to be someone else? And Moses says, if they die normal deaths, then I'm not the messenger of the Lord, because that's not what he's telling me. If the Lord creates something new and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up and they go alive, then you'll know that these men have despised the Lord. And that's obviously exactly what happens. So we can take from this that rebelling against God's established order, rebelling against his authority, rebelling against people who are speaking for the Lord, not that they're making things up in the name of the Lord, but people who are speaking by the authority of the Lord. If we reject them, we're despising the Lord. We're rejecting his message. And that's obviously what we see happening here. Rhodes and Darren brought up a couple interesting kind of side points that you don't get from reading this chapter. But when you're just reading this chapter, it would sound like all of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram's family is also swallowed up. But we're told later, I put the notes in there, Numbers 26 tells us specifically that Korah's sons did not die. I think Rhodes brought that passage to our attention last week. Korah's sons did not die, and then it was Darren that reminded us. It's been a while since I thought about it, but there's actually 11 Psalms. I went back and dug a little. There's 11 Psalms that are attributed to the sons of Korah, which is just fascinating. And then the only other time Korah is mentioned beyond those Psalms is in Jude. In Jude, it's verse 11. It talks about the way of Balaam and the rebellion of Korah. Those are the two things referenced there in Jude. Warning against false teaching, warning against standing up against God's messengers. But the fact that his sons survive tells us something that we would miss if it was just from this chapter. It sounds, I guess maybe I'm assuming some things, but when you see in verse 27, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram came out and stood in the door of their tents together with their wives, their sons, and their little ones. So the sons are there at that point. Maybe not all of them, I guess, would be one thing to think about. But Moses gives them a chance to separate themselves. And but by the time he finishes speaking, verse 29 and 30, the ground opens up. As soon as he finished speaking, the ground opens them up. So either there were some sons that weren't standing with Korah, or while Moses was speaking, like before he finished, maybe some of the sons separated themselves, I guess. Well, possibly, but Rhodes, what's your thought?
Yeah. Verse 27 says, so they got away from the dwelling of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. There's three. Mm-hmm. Period. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of the tents together with their wives, sons, and their little ones.
Right.
So Dathan and Abiram are the only ones where it specifically mentions that.
Which I guess that was Darren's point from last week. Yeah.
Verse 32 says, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them and their households, and my verse says, all of Korah's men and all of their possessions.
Mm-hmm. And that's the household, I'm reading verse 32, the household and all the people who belong to Korah and their goods. The Bible does this something. People sometimes will be a little bit too literal, not literal, because I do believe this is literal story, but they'll point out a detail, what seems to be an inconsistency in the detail, and not realize, well, there could be several reasons why that could make sense. And I think some of what we're describing, where you could have some other sons who weren't there, you could have some people who had separated themselves in the meantime, but regardless, we know some of his sons survived. So that's worth remembering.
I'll say here, I have no doubt that Korah perished in this, Korah. But I do think, like you said, some of his, maybe a son or something that was not in rebellion, was spared, so that lineage could carry on, not the whole family was.
And I guess, one of the interesting things as you kind of fast forward in your mind from that is some of his descendants, still known as the descendants of Korah, write these psalms that are recorded in our scriptures, and yet they carried that legacy of the rebellion of Korah all the way through to the New Testament. The rebellion of Korah, you mentioned Korah, and what's everybody think? They remember this. So they kind of, I would envision them almost wearing that as a mark of shame, the fact that they were associated with that well-known rebellion. Where we can kind of pick up, and all of this is profitable, so if you have a thought, but after the fire comes out and consumes the other 250 men who are offering incense, we have some further instructions here where we're said, or Aaron's told, Aaron, Eleazar, to take these other censers out of the blaze, scatter the fire. These censers of the men who perished, he says, have become holy. Read the language in verse 38. The men who have sinned at the cost of their lives. So they're described as the men who sinned at the cost of their lives. That's kind of a microcosm, obviously, of what sin does. It says, now these censers are going to be made into a covering for the altar and a sign for the people. To me, it's just interesting to see how God can take the rebellion of men and turn it into something beautiful, turn it into something useful, valuable. If nothing else, it's a reminder not to act like these men. It's a reminder to come before Lord with respect. Make sure you're coming before Him His way. But He takes these censers of these rebellious men and then uses that. Now it will be a part of the service moving forward, part of the things to remind them of how they need to respect the Lord. Specifically, verse 40, a reminder to the people of Israel, so that no outsider who is not of the descendants of Aaron should draw near to burn incense, lest they become like Korah and his company. And I think to Darren's point, if Korah was still alive, I don't think he would be referencing him there. So at least some of Korah's sons survive, but I think it's pretty clear Korah does not, that he perishes in this rebellion. Any thoughts, comments down through verse 40? Yeah. So that was the end of all of the rebellion. Who could possibly rebel against the Lord after all that?
And what's interesting, they blame Moses.
Yeah.
I mean, to see that kind of thing, they blame Moses.
Oh, man.
And I don't know why I do it today, but I hope and pray that I'm thinking about it. I hope. Especially the next day.
I do. We began, my thoughts in the beginning of this chapter is, man, that think of all that they've seen. And I do think that there's been some passage of time from some of the miracles, some of the signs, to when we get to Korah's rebellion. But still, how could they have stood up against Moses, seeing God work through him as He did? And yet, these people do the same thing. After seeing the earth swallow, after seeing fire from heaven, it's not like Moses took his sword and ran somebody through. This was the earth opening up. This was fire from heaven. And yet, as Darren says, they blame Moses. They're grumbling against Moses. To me, it is unbelievable until we remember that we also consistently fall short. We also let the Lord down consistently, or we're trying to do better, obviously. This is not an excuse to continue in sin that grace may abound. God forbid that. But every time we sin, we need to see ourselves in these stories. We're now illustrating how fickle we can be in our faith. Let's go ahead and read. It's not much. Just read through the end of the chapter. On the next day, all the congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." And when the congregation had assembled against Moses and against Aaron, they turned toward the tent of meeting, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Moses and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from the midst of this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And they fell on their faces. And Moses said to Aaron, "Take your censer and put fire in it from the altar, and lay incense on it, and carry it quickly to the congregation and make atonement for them. For wrath has gone out from the Lord, the plague has begun." So Aaron took it, as Moses said, and ran into the midst of the assembly. And behold, the plague had already begun among the people. And he put on the incense and made atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Now those who died in the plague were 14,700, besides those who died in the affair of Korah. And Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting when the plague was stopped. All right, so again, to Darren's point, it just seems so amazing that they're on the next day grumbling against Moses and Aaron. The language there says, "You have killed the people of the Lord." I don't know, mentally, I don't know how they couldn't realize that was the Lord's power. It wasn't Moses. It was the Lord working through Moses. But you see again in verse 45, God saying, "Get away, that I may consume them." That's the same thing that happened the day before. He was ready to wipe everybody out.
He's doing it all this time.
Say one more time.
In this case, he's doing it. He has started to kill him.
Yeah.
And then that's when Aaron and Moses, Aaron runs out and stops it. He had started this time. But again, Moses, with his humble attitude, and Aaron, convinced the Lord to stay it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So you see, even as they're on their faces there, that the plague has begun. Wrath has already gone out. And again, if you remember back earlier in chapter 16, God said the same thing in verse 21, almost verbatim, "Separate yourselves that I may consume them in a moment." And that's where Moses says in verse 22, very similarly, they fall on their faces, and Moses asks, "Shall one man sin, and will you be angry with all the congregation?" That was his argument yesterday. That was his argument the day before. And now exactly the same thing. But now the plague has already begun, to Darren's point. So they run out and burn incense. He instructs Aaron to go burn this incense. Verse 47 again says the plague had already begun. And then that visual there in verse 48 of Aaron standing between the living and the dead is just a very powerful image. The difference between the living and the dead, what made that separation is this incense. Moses and Aaron making atonement. Moses and Aaron being willing to stand up for the people. Verse 47 specifically says making atonement for the people. It's a very powerful picture painted there. Yes, sir.
This study's about Moses. We talk about how the scriptures say Moses was the most humble man. But what you also see here is, even though with fault, and Moses had him, and so did Aaron, but you see Aaron here side by side with Moses doing what? Showing that same humility, begging for the life of the people. And yet, most of the time when we think about Aaron, Aaron was still a great man. And most of the time we think about it, though, we talk about the failure at Mount Sinai, and then, later on when he and Miriam questioned Moses, but, still, here's a great man, humble enough that he's praying and trying to stop this, and could you imagine standing, here's the dead, and you see them falling dead, and you're standing there trying to make sure you stop it, you're worried about it getting to you?
Yeah.
I mean, that's gotta be a powerful moment.
Yeah, the fact that he was willing to stand there and be in the middle of that says a lot about his faith, for sure.
Like Darren said, I think after the Miriam's incident, I think we see him almost like the Peter character in the sense that he becomes what he really needs to be. The second thing that really stands out to me is they grumbled against Moses and Aaron, like you said, they're not grumbling against God directly. They're grumbling against Moses and Aaron. You killed the people of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of odd. Not our fellow brethren. They're invoking the name of the Lord as part of the people, and yet you're the one that killed. So they're all warped in their argument. But, kind of also what Darren said, kind of build on that, is God immediately starts this work. There's a mercy aspect because he could have just wiped them all out in an instance. That he starts going through. Moses and Aaron of their own come up with this plan, intervene, and hope it's something that's not acceptable. And to me, they embody while we were still sinners, Christ died for us, because they considered Moses and Aaron enemies, and yet Moses and Aaron intervened. And that's what we see with Jesus, is that we were enemies, and yet Jesus intervened for us to prevent our destruction.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, beautiful comments, both of those. I share your point about starting or really feeling like Aaron is on a different footing at this point. I mean, you really feel it in the narrative, and even through to his death. When we're going to read forward into chapter 20, I liked how you framed him as a kind of a shadow of Peter almost, or Peter role. But you do feel like he has changed. He has fixed what needed to be fixed, and is really filling the role that he was always supposed to be at Moses' side. And I guess part of what makes me see that is when the people are complaining, they're complaining against Moses and Aaron. And you see it in chapter 22, or 20 as well, is they're complaining against Moses and Aaron. And to me, the implication with that connection is they're standing as one. They are unified. Despite Aaron grumbling against him, he's left that behind. And Moses has forgiven him to the point where they're standing together beyond that point.
How startling it is that all their ringleaders are dead in pretty dramatic fashion in the previous 24 hours.
Yes.
But these people are still committed to this outrage that they have against Moses and Aaron. It sort of makes me notice how people a lot of times, once they get stirred up, they're so committed to whatever this action is they've chosen that they don't let their intellect instruct them. This is the wrong way to go, because they've let their emotions take charge of their behavior.
That's really, really powerful point. Connects with what Rhodes was saying about they're lying to themselves. They're deluded. Their thinking is twisted, and that's what Jesus described as the hard-hearted. They cannot see the truth. Their eyes are blinded because of what they want. And their leaders, I think, had fed that, and now it's lingering despite the fact that their leaders are gone. Really good connections, great points. And obviously the warning there for us to make sure that we don't find ourselves standing against the Lord, standing against his message, or somebody who's standing as his messenger. We need to try to always be humble and make sure that we're not grumbling against his purposes. Really powerful thoughts. Rhodes already helped us kind of make that connection between this and Jesus, them standing there. I think Darren's comment as well touched on that. In the future lessons, there is a future lesson where we're going to kind of focus in on some of those things where we see Moses as a type of Jesus, but we've seen it in almost every story that we've looked at. So kind of keep that in your mind. When it gives us the numbers here, 14,700 besides those who died in the affair of Korah. So this is the earth swallowed up them and their household. We don't know exactly how many that was, plus the 250 who were consumed by fire, plus the 14,700. Kind of makes me want to go back and add that all up, like add up who died here and then go back and add up all, anytime we're given numbers of who passed away. And just keep in mind, it's a significant number at this point. Obviously, the whole generation is going to perish in the wilderness before they get a chance to go into the promised land, which is, it's just so sad. And that's the point of Hebrews 3 and 4 that we keep kind of referencing from time to time, is not all of that generation stood with Korah here, but they did all perish in the wilderness. That they did all fail to enter the promised land.
14,000, was it 700?
Yes, sir.
Was 2.5% of the fighting men of the last census, which is a very significant loss of fighting numbers.
Yeah, and there's a story I'm going to reference in the sermon this morning where 70,000 died, and just because I had both those numbers in my head, it's like, wow, those are really high numbers when you're thinking about the population of Israel. All right, well, we can come back on some of this, but let's go ahead and add the next chapter to this, because this is very much still in the aftermath of all of this. The people, again, remember the overall point is some of the Levites were asking for more authority, asking for a greater position, to be on par with Aaron. That's been shown, who really is the spokesman. But again, from this verse 41 on, I think, this is more than just the Levites here. The Levites now have seen what happened. The nation has seen what happened to a bunch of the Levites, and the whole nation. That's part of what we need to understand from verse 41 is most of those who perished with the earth opening up was Levites, a little bit of the Reubenites, but now verse 41 and following, you have the rest of the congregation. So this chapter 17 is really kind of putting a cap on all of these events. So let's read that. Verse 17, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel and get from them staffs, one from each father's house, from all the chiefs according to their father's houses, 12 staffs. Write each man's name on his staff, and write Aaron's name on the staff of Levi. For there shall be one staff for the head of each father's house. Then you shall deposit them in the tent of meeting before the testimony where I meet with you. And the staff of the man whom I choose shall sprout. Thus I will make to cease from me the grumblings of the people of Israel, which they grumble against you. Moses spoke to the people of Israel, and all their chiefs gave him staffs, one for each chief according to the father's houses, 12 staffs, and the staff of Aaron was among their staffs. And Moses deposited the staffs before the Lord in the tent of the testimony. On the next day, Moses went into the tent of the testimony, and behold, the staff of Aaron for the house of Levi had sprouted and put forth buds and produced blossoms and bore ripe almonds. Then Moses brought out all the staffs before the Lord to the people of Israel, and they looked, and each man took his staff. And the Lord said to Moses, put back the staff of Aaron before the testimony to be kept as a sign for the rebels, that you may make an end of their grumblings against me, lest they die. Thus did Moses, as the Lord commanded him, so he did. And the people of Israel said to Moses, behold, we perish, we are undone, we are all undone. Everyone who comes near to the tabernacle of the Lord shall die. Are we all to perish? Sounds like they're finally starting to get it a little bit there at the end. Of course, they made statements like that at Sinai as well. So it's all a process of coming to this great realization. But so here you see, again, as we were pointing out from chapter 16, you have this conflict within the tribe of Levi for the house of Aaron to be representative of the high priesthood. Now in chapter 17, he's going to reaffirm the point that the tribe of Levi has been chosen, that they are his tribe. And this is just such a beautiful picture to me, an interesting picture, I guess would be a better way to say it. where you have these 12 staffs put aside, and then you come out, and they come out the next day, and Aaron's rod has not only sprouted, but produced blossoms and ripe almonds. I mean, all the way to fruit in one night. So God, obviously behind this. And then as with the censers in the previous chapter, they're used, the censers of the rejected men were used as a sign, a covering for the altar to remind the people to be careful. Aaron's rod is also to be kept to be kept as a sign, verse 10, for the rebels to make an end to their grumblings. And God says that a couple of times here, verse 5 and then again verse 10, doing this to make an end to their grumblings, doing this to put an end to these questions. Who is the Lord speaking through? Who is the Lord's representative? And so he makes it so very clear on these two occasions, or really this one occasion with these two signs. But this wasn't the first time. I guess that's one thing that's so obvious to us as we're kind of going through these stories and have them kind of more or less fresh on our minds, that they didn't need these signs to know. They had previous signs that could have helped them to know. This is just another thing that God gives them. And nor does it stop their grumblings. I mean, you think about God's expressed purpose is to cause their grumblings to cease, and their grumblings don't cease. This is not an end to it. It kind of gets back to what Darren said, as the minute we stop seeing ourselves in these stories, the minute we stop seeing ourselves as the grumblers and the complainers and the people who are falling short, then we're missing the point. This is part of the point for us, is that we can learn from this example, from these examples. And again, to the point of Hebrews 3 and 4, where he really drives that point home, is don't be like that generation that perished in the wilderness. They found every way possible to rebel and complain and to fall short. And they did not enter the rest because of that disobedience, because of that rebellion, because of that lack of faith. So he's in Hebrews 3 and 4, he's begging us not to be like them. Don't be like them who have to be consistently reminded and punished because of their unbelief. How much, or what points should we get from verses 12 and 13 there, where it almost sounds like this is the first time they're realizing that they have to be careful when they come before the Lord. I don't know what points do you think, or can we get from that?
A couple months ago, not really tell, a couple months ago, the midnight sermon he gave here, kind of an aha moment. With all the death and destruction that they've seen in the last short period of time, it's like, okay, we're starting to understand, even when budding this rod and bearing fruit, we're starting to understand, we've been wrong. Okay. And the Lord's got the right plan, he's correct, and we need to follow him. Yeah. And why it took this long to understand it, it shows us that we can be that difficult and that, right. I don't know about insensitive or unruly or unwilling.
Yep.
So
I think that's right. I guess that is what I get from it, is it's just another kind of aha moment, another point of realization, a point of growth maybe. I'm assuming, the way I'm viewing this, is Korah's rebellion happens, I'm imagining several years after the failed conquest, and maybe several years again before Moses' sin. We don't know exactly where, but remember, for the generation that is perishing in the wilderness, there's another generation that is growing up in the wilderness. There's a generation that's going to falter and be buried there. There's another generation that is being groomed, if you will, to take the promised land. And they're learning from these things. And maybe for some people this was a really eye-opening thing. Maybe this really was a turning point for them. Of course, then you get to chapter 20, and we have more grumblings, and you can see some falling short again. So it is interesting to think about. I guess, taking it as Darren was for us, taking it down to ourselves and thinking about ourselves. With every time I falter, every time we as individuals falter, it starts to feel like, oh, well, this is the same old thing. Here I go again. But there is, if we will work at it, there is growth. We faltered, but slightly different way, and we can learn from that. We can grow in a different way. I think that just has to be our mentality when we realize that we've let the Lord down again, to try to pick ourselves back up and try to be better for it, and try to keep maturing as we go along. Any other thoughts or comments about that?
The Lord told Moses to keep the staff, right? And as we read through history, or even in Hebrews, that staff was in the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes, sir. I think that's right. Yep. Any other thoughts? All right. This is an interesting kind of turning point for me. I went ahead and kind of skipped ahead toward, and kind of took in to the end of the story, the end of Moses' life, and what all we want to deal with and talk about. And basically, I just wanted you to kind of see where I'm headed as this story. We're still probably several months away from being done, but I just wanted you to see kind of how I'm wanting to proceed at this point. So we're going to go ahead with the remainder of our time and read Numbers 20 and start chewing on some of that. But we're off his lesson plan at this point. That's why I'm putting this up here for you. So for the rest of our time today and next week, I want us to kind of chew on chapter 20 and be thinking about some of those points. But our book really doesn't deal hardly at all with chapters 21 through 36 of Numbers. And there's some interesting narrative points in there. And what I would ask you to do, this is a good bit of homework, but I would ask you to read chapters 21 through 36 of Numbers and look for things that are said about Moses. Remember, we're studying Moses, so look for things that are said about Moses, things that Moses does, and we'll just try to kind of chew on them, one story at a time, picking out narratives and trying to make the points. Within that, there's the story of Balaam and Balak. Moses is barely mentioned in that story until the very end. So, for the purpose of this study, we'll kind of skip over that. But if you want to refer to that and remind yourself of it, but basically what we're trying to do is just pick out points where we can make some application about Moses and his role in some of these things. And I've got kind of a similar idea for lesson 14. Now, this is where we kind of start to get back on track with our book. Is lesson 14 is Deuteronomy. If you've ever studied Deuteronomy before, there's no way we cover that in one lesson. So Deuteronomy is interesting because in some ways it's like Leviticus, and you're looking at laws and regulations and speeches of Moses. But in some ways it's like Numbers, and you've got some narrative in there. So I was thinking about kind of almost breaking it up in my mind into, hey, let's go through and let's talk about some of the narrative, some of the story, and then let's go through and talk about some of the teaching, and so much of it is Moses speaking to the people, Moses talking to the people. There's a lot to get from that when we're studying Moses. I mean, that is what we're focusing on. So if you can, as you're going through lesson 14 and as you're skimming Deuteronomy, and again, it's going to be impossible to study it deeply, but let's go through once and just kind of pick out some of the narrative points, and then we'll go out again and point out some of the teaching that we can see there. And again, I don't know how many class periods that it will take, but chapter 15 lessons 15 and 16 seemed very similar to me. It talks about the death of Moses, of which we just have a few verses. And then there's a whole lesson 16, that's called the obituary of Moses. Which again, it feels like we should be able to kind of put those together and thinking about them simultaneously. But then you get to lesson 17 and 18. I was like, I want to think about 17 and 18 together, but there's a lot there. These are the lessons where he's talking about the connections to Christ. What Rhodes introduced for us earlier is Moses as a type of Christ. So lessons 17 and 18, I'm not sure exactly how long we're going to need to get through that, but there's some beautiful, beautiful information in there that, he's got them listed as bullet points. So we might be able to kind of just read the point, connect some verses, and then keep moving. But there is a lot of good thoughts in there, so I don't want to rush it too much. And then obviously the final lesson is Moses in the New Testament. When Moses is referenced in the New Testament and what lessons are made. We've been connecting some of those as we've been going along, but I think that will be a really good cap. So at that point, we'll kind of be keeping up with his pace, or at least his organization. All right. Any questions or comments about that? Just kind of the plan moving forward. I'll try to keep putting that up each week and let us know what the next step is. All right, well, let's just read some from chapter 20. We won't have enough time to dive into it. In fact, I'm going to read down through verse 13. Verse 13 is probably a good stopping point for today. And the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into the wilderness that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron, your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them and give drink to the congregation and their cattle." And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock. And he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly. And the congregation drank, and their livestock. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and through them he showed himself holy." All right. As I say, I'd like to come back on this some next week, but we can just kind of introduce what are some of the just powerful points. Just kind of start listing some. What are the points that can be made from Moses' sin here, from this rebellion and Moses' sin?
It's about around 5 or 6, 7, all the different times they say the same thing over and over. Yes, we're going over and over.
Yeah.
And it will continue.
Yeah. As far as the people's complaint, it just somebody hit replay, right? It's almost identical. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir.
I just think it's interesting in verse 3, would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. And I think in my mind that's referencing the rebellion.
Yes, sir.
And I'm thinking I would much rather die, of natural causes than rebelling against the Lord, being killed by it. It's just, I can't, it's one of those things.
Yeah. It's an interesting observation, Philip. But it does feel like they're referencing that point, or that time. Rhodes, wouldn't you?
Yeah. It's not like they've been in the desert and needed water before God hasn't made provision.
Yes.
It's like,
Yes.
goldfish memory sometimes. But then again, I think about my own life, and then I'll put my hand over my mouth.
That's right. That's right. I like the vision of the goldfish memory. That's exactly what it feels like.
From the very beginning, we had to do with food and water. And God tells us that we don't have to worry about that. He'll take care of it. need is you basically food and water.
Absolutely.
It's amazing that is the thing that's sort of central to it all.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, really good thoughts, really good thoughts. They're complaining. I think we made this point from the previous story. They don't come saying to Moses, we want to complain to the Lord. They come and grumble against Moses and Aaron. They're grumbling against Moses and Aaron, which they still didn't realize meant they were grumbling against the Lord. Which, again, it's fascinating how we do that when somebody comes at us with the truth. Sometimes our default is to attack that person instead of thinking about the message, thinking about the one who sent them. But the scriptures make this point all the time, that if you're rebelling against the message or the messenger, you're really revolting, you're grumbling against the Lord.
And why have you made us come out of Egypt? It's like, weren't you crying for deliverance out of Egypt?
Yeah.
We're to a generation now that doesn't remember all of this.
Yeah.
Apparently they don't remember, just like in the days of Joshua.
Yeah.
Joshua, they all died. There were people that didn't know the Lord.
That's one of the interesting points to me off of this too, is you're halfway between generations. A lot of these people had seen what Rhodes is referencing, but it was some years ago. So how many of them who are making this complaint are the ones who had already been making the complaint, and how many of them are just now old enough to start complaining for themselves? So yeah, it is an interesting point.
To their point, probably most of it, because you're at the end, because they're the wilderness is dead, so they're getting ready to come in.
That's right.
Miriam's dying, Aaron's about to,
This is a new generation.
finishing out the.
Good thought. Good thought. Obviously, we've got to get into talking about Moses' sin and some of the very, very thoughtful about the points to take from that. It'd be easy to say, well, Moses sinned because he didn't speak to the rock. He sinned because he struck it instead of speaking it as he would have struck it. And that's true. There's absolute sense in which that's true, but it's deeper than that. It's deeper than that. So let's get ready to talk about that. And as I say, really from here, we'll really dig into that next week, but from here on, we're in this next section here where we're scanning for points of narrative. So if you can kind of keep reading from here through the end of Numbers and just keep looking for those points of narrative along the way. So, all right, we'll stop for now. We got about 12 minutes before the worship hour begins.
Yesterday, so they're both